Do you want to share a little bit of it about it, the experience? It's up to you. No
Yeah,
pressure.
no, absolutely. Actually, I'll talk about that in my presentation. So
Oh,
yeah, I'll kind of share my story a little bit. I've got my cup of tea, so I'm still very much feeling my British heritage. A nice cup of tea. That's the answer to everything, right?
no, it is. It is indeed. It is
But
indeed.
we're just nearly at the hour, so I will share my screen and then we can kick off if we're okay to go. Just check that you can see everything.
All right. If you by now you don't know who Scott is, and if you have used the Ribbon Workbench or one of the many other tools that he has built, that's the man right there.
Oh, thank you. That's a pretty awesome way of introducing me. I'm sure there are plenty of people that don't know who I am, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of getting to know the Canadian community and being feeling a little bit closer to this side of the world now. So
Awesome. Awesome.
right,
Well,
well,
you are on. Take it away. The show is
awesome.
yours.
All right, well, I will just finish my cup of tea, so I'm good to go. So, yeah, thank you very much, Victor, and excellent job on everyone today. All the sessions so far have been brilliant, and excellent job of organizing, Victor. Fantastic, and thank you very much for having me. It's really good to be here. So yeah, I am Scott Durow, and I am a solution architect. So I'm a developer at heart. I've come from tech background and all that kind of stuff. But now, I trying to bridge that gap between the business side of things and the tech side of things. So I'm very much, I love getting down into the actual technical side of the platform, but also looking at it from the business side of things, which is really, I think, really important. I'm really honored to be an MVP as well. So that's and that enables me to talk to the product team and things like that. So I feel really privileged in that respect. But if you don't already follow me on Twitter, and I kind of tweet about the kind of stuff that I'm doing, which may or not be interesting to you. But as Victor alluded to, I have recently moved from the UK. So I was living in Oxford with my family, and so my wife actually is Canadian. So she was born here and lived here for her childhood up until when she moved over to the UK to work. And so we basically moved back to where she grew up. So we're very close to her parents and her sister, which is really great to be close to this side of the world family. And yeah, loving it really. It's an amazing part of the world. I do feel a little bit like I've been on vacation since I've been here, because I've only ever been here on vacation. So maybe that's never going to stop. I mean, which would be great if I feel like I'm on vacation for the rest of my life. Then that's not going to be a bad thing. But the thing is that it's such a big difference in terms of the size of the country. So Victor said, we've got to talk about some Canadian fun facts in our presentation, and I think the Anglo-Canadian relations is going to be the topic of. Thanks, Sunil. Thank you for the welcome to Canada. Yeah, so the topic of my fun facts is about Canada. Now, what is the thing is I really still can't get my mind around is the difference in size. So look here, I've put a typical map here. Look how big Britain is, and look over there's Canada. When actual fact, when you look at the relative sizes of Canada and Britain, I think I might have been a little bit generous even there with the size of Britain. Britain is tiny compared to the amount of space in Canada. And so, yeah, I have to kind of wrap my head around that size. So I started to kind of look at the land mass statistics. And then I thought, well, rather than just kind of talking about those facts, why don't I just build an app for it? Because my topic of this talk is about using Canvas apps and in enhancing Canvas apps using ProCode, which is the Power Apps component framework. So I thought, how can I build an app that demonstrates the power of Canvas apps, but also the power of the PCF, how we can improve and increase the power of what's already an amazing platform using that ProCode. So I just want to kind of, show that animation again there because I was quite pleased with myself when I did that. Look how tiny Britain is. But so I started looking for facts, and if I swap over to Canvas apps here, so here I've built an app, and this is on the phone form factor. So I've got at the top here, I've got a load of different facts, and I've got a true or false here. So what we can do, and this is if you've ever taken any one of those tests, like the health and safety at work tests. Anyone done those things, or the GDPR or data protection test, where you have to kind of pick up some facts and say, is it true or false? Anyone done that? Put a +1 on the chat if you've had to take one of those tests, mandatory tests in your organization. That, yeah, and you kind of then go, oh, the pass mark is 80%. I hope I pass. And what's going to happen if I don't pass? Are they going to kick me out? But so let's start at the top. So Scott moved to Canada because he was thrown out of the UK for being too polite. Well, obviously that's true. I was thrown out of the UK because everyone knows everyone in Canada is really polite, right? But 89% of Canada's land area is owned by Queen Elizabeth II. So that's the current Queen of England. So this is what's amazes me about the relationship between Canada and England. It's very recent. So actually that's true. So there's a huge amount of space in Canada that just is not developed, and so it's still just kind of by default owned by the crown in the UK. 89, it's a huge space. I can't get my head around, because in the UK I think there's only 2 or 3% of land that's not developed and owned. It's everyone is crammed in the UK. So Canada only became fully independent as a country 38 years ago. It seems quite recent. Is this true or false? Well, actually, it is true. Maple syrup is made from fermenting the leaves of maple trees. What do you think about that? Oh, yeah, definitely, because I've got no idea how they make maple syrup. I'm sure that it's something to do with the fermentation process. Maple leaf is the Canadian flag was originally going to be a beaver. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's probably false. Canada occupies 6% of the Earth's surface. That seems a lot of that's a reasonable amount of space. So I'll say that's true. The beaver is the largest rodent in the world. Yeah, I didn't even know they were a rodent, to be honest, but I'll say that's true. So there we go. I've used my app, and I'll submit my answers. So you can see how I did. Oh dear, I don't think I passed. Are they going to kick me out now? Have I not met or got the minimum entry to the UK? So actually, maple syrup is not made by the fermenting of maple trees. As I think we all probably know, it's from the syrup, from the sap of the maple tree. And definitely, the beaver is a rodent, but it's not the largest rodent in the world. But and yeah, I didn't get kicked out from the UK, contrary to popular belief. So anyway, there you can see. So if I go back, I can move these around, and I could mark them. But if anyone's written a Canvas app, I don't know if anyone's going, wait a minute, what's going on there? I've got drag and drop functionality. How in the earth is that working? So actually, this is an example of where I am powering up a Canvas app using the Power Apps component framework, because there is no such functionality in just native Canvas apps to do this. So I'm going to run through how I did that and just sort of kind of give you a bit of info on how you can start to use the PCF to do the same thing. And so I have this hashtag ProCode, NoCode Unite, which I started with Sara Lagerqvist from Sweden, and because it was really about this sort of, previously there was almost this war going on between no code, low code, and ProCode. It was like you got to pick a camp. You got to be, I'm either a no coder, low coder, or I'm a pro coder. And which just doesn't seem right, because we've got all these amazing tools in the platform, Power Automate and Flow and bots, Power BI, and there's so much, and especially we were saying with the RPA functionality in Power Automate now, there's some really cool stuff that you don't really need to go down to that code level. But of course, what makes our platform so special is that we have got both sides. We can extend it through the power. I mean, this is Microsoft. Microsoft is unlike any tech organization, I believe, in the world, in that they focus equally on that pro code as they do on that low code. that's what makes us so special from any other the competitors. And Microsoft talk about no cliffs. They say if you get to the point where you can't get any further using the low code, no code, you know what? You can go into the Visual Studio in the Azure space and you can extend it. So that's what's so cool. Now, I was at this August 2019. Seems like age away now, given all the stuff that's happened in 2020. But I was talking to some folks from the product team, Microsoft, and we were talking about, you know, how can we actually build something like Lemmings? Now, I don't know if anyone's seen I posted this actually on social media, and one of the things I do quite often do is when I'm learning a new language is I will try and write lemmings in it. It's like it's not my thing, until I've written lemmings in a language, I'm not really happy that I've actually achieved my goal, and mastered that language. And I was talking to these guys from the product team who've been working in Canvas apps, and we were like going, oh, it's probably not going to be possible. But you know what? We've got PCF. So I started out the job of writing lemmings. But you know what? Actually, I did it without using the Power Apps component framework. I did it purely in the low code expressions in Canvas, which was a real surprise to me. So it just goes to show you how far you can push that Canvas app platform before you need to go into that kind of low code and into that ProCode space. And so just a quick history of PCF. So, how did we get to this point where we can extend Canvas apps using ProCode? And the thing is that PCF was built actually for model driven. Originally, it was Canvas apps was just a mere twinkle in Satch's eye. Or at least the product team's eyes. So Charles Lamana's eyes, maybe he's got lots of twinkles in his eyes, so I'm sure he's doing all sorts of cool stuff now. But the thing is that it was a technology that the product team for model-driven apps was saying, how can we allow this extension of the model-driven framework so that we can do some really cool stuff inside the app without having to use iframes? Now, if you add in a PCF component today and open up that app in a Canvas app, you get this little officious little message that says, this app may contain unsafe code. And this is a good example of why actually the Canvas app world is not entirely trusting yet of the PCF. Model-driven apps, you don't get any of this stuff. You don't. Model-driven apps, yeah, we invented PCF. We trust PCF because we invented it. But Canvas app, not so much trust yet. So, by the way, I added that little skull that doesn't appear there, in case you wondered. So we had this model-driven apps, and we got this ProCode PCF side of things in model-driven, which is really great because it introduced so much more power that we could do in model-driven apps. And then, of course, Canvas apps came into the world, and suddenly we've got Canvas apps components. And now, if you've done lots of Canvas app work already, Canvas app components are really cool. But they are very much low-code components, right? You're still creating expressions. It just allows you to reuse your low-code across multiple apps, which is awesome. So in model-driven apps, we didn't have any kind of concept like that. We had just still the PCF. So what the product team did is say, how can we sort of enable that ProCode story inside Canvas apps? And so that's where this unified controls PCF mentality started to happen. It was like, okay, well, we've already got this PCF component thing over here in model-driven. Let's make it actually underpin the whole platform and make it a unified controlled interface. So when I first heard about that, that was amazing. I was like, wow, this really does now deliver on that promise of no cliffs. Now, back, just over a year ago, I did this thing, which I did it for a bit to make a point, really. And what I did is I used a PCF control to allow running JavaScript inside a Canvas app, and everyone was like, ooh, that means you can do like complex expressions that you can't normally do in JavaScript in Canvas apps expressions. But the thing is, I kind of put it out there to make a point, and actually PCF is absolutely not for this. PCF is not about saying, I'm really frustrated with expressions and I would like to not use expressions. I would like to use ProCode JavaScript. That's not what PCF. PCF is about allowing us to extend it in this component-based architecture. So it's about pro-coders creating a component that exposes properties and events that then I, as a low coder, can then consume. And it's consistent, it plays by all the same rules, and I can use expressions to interact with it. So that's a really, really important dividing line. It's not PCF in Canvas apps is not about making JavaScript work in Canvas apps. It's about saying it allows us to extend the components that are available to us so that then low coders can then compose their apps using that functionality that wouldn't be available to them just by using the default controls. And my example of a drag and drop is case in point. Okay, because that's extending the functionality. It's not just simply running JavaScript, because and I'll show you in the demo that how that component I can still use expressions. So I love this phrase, progress over perfection, right? Because progress over perfection kind of is not, in other words, are other phrases like don't try and boil the ocean, those kind of things, it's a journey that we're going on. As I said, PCF components came from model-driven apps. There's a lot of maturity there. It's in this general availability. You can use it in production, but we are still a little bit on that journey with PCF controls. And so you do have to kind of decide, do I really need a PCF control? It's one of those things. Do I want to jump straight in and start coding, or how far can I get with the user interface? I think this is a really important question to always ask yourself. I'm not advocating that we just, oh, well, actually, I've come up against a bit of a hurdle. Gotta go and get some ProCode to do it. I think it's always worthwhile pushing the Canvas apps to get, because if you can stay in that low code environment, you do have a lot of things that the total cost of ownership is going to be lower going forwards. But if you're going to if you want to consume external services, if you want to extend the UI that you really, really need to, then it's where that no cliffs comes in. And my Lemmings example is a case in point, right? It's like, well, actually, I pushed it and I didn't need to use a ProCode, a PCF component. And that ultimately means is that is going to be sort of more flexible. I'll be able to maintain it as the platform evolves, it's more likely to continue to work. So really where I'm heading there is that actually Canvas apps PCF is not general availability yet. It's a journey that we're going on. And so, just a word of caution. After this, don't go, right, okay, we've come up against the problem. We want to write a PCF because we've got something that's deploying to production in a few months' time. It's not intended for production. However, what we can do is we can go on Microsoft's journey with them to really sort of understand the capabilities and also give our feedback. So it was announced in February 27th of February 2020. And if you look at the docs, it's general availability in March 2021. So it's not that far off, which is good. So there's still work to be done, but we're getting there. So now is a really good time to start to look at it and understand how it works. So with that in mind, how does it work? And the good news is quite simple. As a framework, PCF is actually quite simple. There are some complexities in terms of how you're writing JavaScript code and HTML, and that's got its complexities, but the team have done a really good job of simplifying it. But if we wind back to originally why PCF was invented, in model-driven apps, what we had this kind of iframe mechanism where you've got a browser DOM at the top here. So you've got HTML and JavaScript running. And then what you could do is say, okay, well, I'm just going to embed another browser DOM, another browser web page inside my model-driven apps. And that had some challenges because what you ended up having is this sort of like window that you couldn't break out of, because I'm just basically a window into another web page, and I could interact with the page above it and below it, but I couldn't actually put overlays on top of it, which caused some real kind of grief especially when you got pop-up dialogues and drop downs and things like that. So it wasn't a tightly integrated way of extending the user interface. So hence why PCF controls were invented for model-driven apps, is that it was about how can we extend the user interface in a much, much more native fashion, right? And so that's why PCF controls actually don't have this iframe. They add HTML and JavaScript directly to the browser DOM, which means you can do things like, have pop-ups, things that look completely as though they are native to the actual host application that you're embedding that control into. So you can see there, what we've got here is we've got a model-driven app, so we've got pop-ups, we've got complex UI with drag and drop and all those kind of things. And so when we move over into Canvas app, which is what we're talking about in this session, the Canvas app is a browser DOM. And so then naturally the PCF control kind of naturally fits to that, because existing out of the box controls that you've got for that you're just adding in rectangles and galleries and stuff, those are just adding HTML controls. And so it naturally fitted with the PCF control mechanism. So hence how I can do this, because what we're seeing here is a mashup of ProCode and existing stuff that comes from Canvas apps, is because the two can intrinsically work together because they're all inside the same browser. I mean, you could never do that if you were using that kind of iframe technique of just windowing it. But of course, because the PCF is the same, actually what happens is the implementation inside the host is subtly different. So do bear in mind that if you are writing a PCF control for a model-driven app, it's actually a very, very different story if you're writing a PCF control for a Canvas app. It's the same framework, but a sort of a pitfall that people fall into is, oh, well, if I've written a PCF control for a model-driven app, naturally it's going to work for a Canvas app. That may work for very simple things, but in general, you do have to have a consideration. How is it going to work for a Canvas app? So first things first, if you want to start to play around with Canvas app PCFs, you have to enable it in your environment. So you have to allow publishing of Canvas apps with code components. If you go into your settings and your features, there's a checkbox. And that may or may not go away after general availability release. I'm not sure, but once you've done that, what it enables you to then do is to say, okay, I can now start to create apps and publish apps with code components. And so the way that the code components work is, as I said, really quite simple. And it's almost like alluringly simple, because when a Canvas app embeds a PCF control, what it does is it calls a special function called init on your PCF control. And that's the responsibility of the init, is to kind of do all the stuff that you need to do set up. You might need to go and retrieve some stuff from an external web service. Maybe you need to take some of the kind of environment variables and set up some things in your PCF control in terms of like widths and heights and those kind of things. But what it does is in that init, it passes a context, which kind of gives the control the ability to interact with the Canvas app runtime. And then as soon as the expressions, any data is available from the Canvas apps, it calls this function called update view, and it's passing the context again. And now at this point, the context has got all the data. So the expressions, if you've got an expression that is going to a connector, to a CDS connector, or any connector for that matter, and then you're going to then bind that data in your expression to a property on your PCF control. That then gets passed in the context of the update. And so then you can then take that and go and create your HTML DOM elements. And so what that means is that HTML DOM element takes the expressions. It doesn't need to worry about evaluating the expressions. And this is where the power of PCF inside Canvas app really comes. And this is, I believe, more powerful than if you're using it inside a model-driven app, because in a model-driven app, it's kind of the same, except for the context that you're getting is really just the attributes that you're binding to on a form, or the values that you're getting from a data set in a view. Whereas here, the sky's the limit that gets passed to the PCF control. It's whatever low-code expressions you want to do. And thereby, that is the power. And that's why having a component that then is consumed by low-coders, that is where the power is, because then the low-coder is in control of what they want that PCF component to do. By depending on the expressions that you pass, you can fundamentally change very drastically the behavior of your PCF control. But in addition to that expression, that data that's being passed, there is also this really special function pointer called notify output change. So if there is any data that is changed in time inside your PCF control, and in our case, say you have a drag drop event, we drop something onto a drop zone, then we will then call this special notify output change. And what that does is that tells the Canvas app, hey, I know you gave me all this data, but I've taken this data and I've done something with it, and I've got some updates for you. Maybe I've changed some of the data, or I've got an event that's happened, in our case drop. And so what happens is that means that the Canvas app then reevaluates its expressions. And in order to do that, it calls a special function on our PCF control called get outputs. And it says, well, I know you told me that something changed, but now can you give me the data that's changed? And that's how it reevaluates the expressions. And of course, that may then fire other events. And then suddenly you're all back into the pure Canvas app world. And that gives you that power, because then you can do loads and loads of other stuff. So it's actually really alluringly quite simple. And so what we've got is the architecture of these PCF controls is effectively, it's a bundle. It's this sort of load of stuff that's inside a PCF control. One is the manifest XML. The manifest XML is basically telling the Canvas app, these are the events and these are the properties that you can bind expressions to. Then you've got all the JavaScript that has that in it, that update view, calling the notify output change and the get outputs function. Then you may have some CSS for any of your HTML, and then may have some resource strings if you want to make it multilingual. And so in any given solution, you can have multiple of these PCF controls, but each PCF control is like self-contained in the sense it contains these things. A control doesn't, you don't have multiple controls with any given manifest XML. A manifest XML describes a single control, but you can then include multiple controls in your solution. So what happens is when you import that component, what's happening is the Canvas app is looking at all the solutions installed inside your environment, and then it's looking for custom controls. And then it says, okay, now link that custom control to my Canvas app to make it available. You don't automatically get all the controls in your environment. You have to explicitly pick one out. And then it looks at the manifest XML to then be able to decide on what properties can I bind to this control, those low-code expressions. And then again, it looks at the manifest and decides on what events can it raise. And then you can update the component if you've got a new version, etc. So when you're developing it, you're doing that. But then actually what you're doing, you can actually package both your Canvas app and your PCF controls in the same solution. So if you're deploying it to your production as a managed solution, you can then have both, and they're sort of intrinsically linked then. So you don't need to do the import process. It just knows that it comes from that same solution, and it binds it to a specific version in that solution as well. So it's fully, this PCF lifecycle is fully ALM it's ALM compliant, which I think is really quite cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how that looks when we're using it in the Canvas app, and we're also going to look at what that manifest XML looks like as well, and what the JavaScript looks like for that drag and drop. But you can see here, this is the kind of exercise we go through. We import the component. We go to this code tab, which makes me laugh. We've got this code which is now showing us all the different PCF components that we can import, and as soon as you've imported it, it comes available in your control toolbox. So it just becomes another tool alongside text input and edit forms and all the galleries and things like that, and so it's sort of powering up your Canvas app, hence the name of the session. And then you can use expressions to bind to all of the different properties that are available. And then on change, you can say, well, okay, when something happens, I'm going to go and do some functionality. So let's have a quick look at what that actually looks like. So let's go over to VS Code. And also what I'm going to do is look at and go to an environment here. If we've got time at the end, I'll show you Power Lemmings. That will be a bit of a light relief. So we've got our Maple Power here. That's the this drag and drop functionality that I was just showing. But what we're going to do is just going to go and create a new app a little bit simpler, just to sort of demonstrate this functionality. And so what I'm going to show importing that code component, and then we're going to flip over to the manifest XML and then look at the manifest XML and see how it looks, how you can see that the available properties inside our PCF control in our Canvas app is actually mapping to that manifest file. So while that's loading, we'll go over in here. Well, what this is VS Code. So I'll always use VS Code for all of my PCF components, not Visual Studio, because VS Code works a lot better with writing JavaScript. And actually, this is TypeScript. And TypeScript is definitely the preferred way. And in fact, all the samples that you get inside the docs are in TypeScript. And there's a special command you can use which will scaffold up your PCF. It's called pack. So I would say pack PCF init. And then what that gives is it gives me a sample template to use. Now, I have to pick between a field and a data set. But actually, in model-driven world, field and data set is actually quite different. Because one is data sets is all on views and the field is all on the forms. Actually, in the Canvas app world, there is less difference, actually. Really, the only difference is if I pick data set, it allows me to have expressions, property expressions that I can bind to collections. That's really, if I make it a field, I don't get that functionality available to me. So when I use my pack PCF init, and if I go to my command line here, I can say pack PCF init. It gives me the options that are available. I just have to pass a namespace, and then there's this template here that's specifies a field or a data set. And what that gives me is this sort of folder structure. And at the basic root, there is this folder which is called the name of the PCF component you give. And inside that, there is this control manifest. And so that's where we're specifying what properties are exposed to my Canvas app. So if I go back over to my Canvas app, hopefully it's loaded now. I'm going to create a blank tablet layout. And then what we're going to do is going to import that specific component and see the properties available. So what we've got in our manifest file is at the top level, it says, here's my control. You can only have one control per manifest. And here are all the properties that I'm making available to binding to inside my canvas. So in my case, what I'm doing here is I'm saying I've got a drop zone. And so that's what this is doing. This component is providing a drop zone that can either be a source or a target of things that I can move around. And I'm designating one of those drop zones to be a master. Okay, so the master is the thing that's going to have those events. Remember I was saying get the notify outputs changed, the thing that tells, hey, Canvas apps, I've changed something. The master zone will be the one that receives all those events. And then we've got this other drop zone IDs, and that's basically telling the master zone, okay, I'm called zone 1, but actually I want to listen to events from zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. So these three properties are the kind of the key ones for understanding what's going on. And then we've got these additional ones that are actually going to be used for the events. So if I look over at the end here, what we've got is this special usage property. Hopefully you can see that. I'll make it a little bit bigger. So the usage is the really important thing here, because there's primarily two types of usage. We've got input and we've got bound. Input is basically saying I'm never going to tell you about a change to that. So it's I don't need to monitor different changes on that particular binding. And the other one is saying it's bound to say that actually this is going to be changing and I'm going to tell you about it by raising an event. So you can see these drop source, drop target, dropped IDs. These are the values that will get updated when I drop a value and the on change. And then there's some other things here which I'm specifying, the colors. Now, this is a really good point, because when I'm creating components, you have to think in terms of the low coder, right? Because you need to say, well, what functionality do I need to make configurable? How do I? Because bearing in mind you're writing a component that someone else is going to be consuming probably, and you want, even though maybe you are going to be consuming it, it's a worthwhile mindset to get into is actually think about it as though someone else will be consuming it. So Alan just asked here, external service usage. Do you have information about that? So this is actually something that's isn't quite documented at the moment, but it's basically around the definition of a premium PCF control or not. If it's externally calling an external service, it's going to basically be categorized as premium, and in a similar sort of way to premium Power Automate connectors, that kind of thing. But it's it will be updated in the docs very shortly. And the thing is because this is still not NGA, this is evolving, and I just love the fact that you kind of look at this stuff on a almost weekly basis, and there's new stuff being added. Sometimes you have to wait a few weeks for it to get documented, but do bear in mind it's not intended for production because of that constant change at the moment. So if I go back over to my my Canvas app, what we can do here is we can go into the Insert tab, and I can go over to Custom, and I can say Import Component, and I get this code tab here, and what it's doing is it's just searching all the solutions installed in my environment, and it's picking up all the Canvas, all the PCF components. So I can select Canvas app, drag and drop, and this is the kind of thing that someone a low coder would be doing. They'd be consuming the components, and that's what creates this really nice workflow. And now if I go over to the plus button here and navigate into code components, you can see that we've now got our Canvas app drag and drop, which is pretty cool. And I can just simply put it onto my my environment here. And once it's put it in, dropped it onto my environment, what it's doing is it's going and loading all the resources. So if we go back over to the actual manifest file, what we've got here is a second section called resources. Oh, incidentally, I should just mention that actually in addition to the property, remember I said there was two types of component, data set and field. Well, if you make it a dataset component, that enables you to say, you know what, I'm also going to give you, in addition to the ability to specify properties, I'm going to give you the ability to specify a binding to a collection. Of course, that's important because we need to be able to bind to a collection of items that are in our drag and drop components. As we move them around, those items are going to change. But in Canvas apps, that's really the kind of the main difference, which is again, it's very different to model-driven apps because remember they're very different hosts. So you have to have this different mindset when you're writing components. So we've got this resources over here, which defines like the code. Where is my code located? Which will when it compiles, it will then convert that into the bundle.js as we saw in that previous diagram. And then we've got other resources like the strings that are used for localization and CSS files. So let's go back over to our Canvas app, and so now we've got this drag and drop button, drag and drop component here, which is highlighted. Okay, big deal. And if I go into my tree view, you can see here it's named it Canvas app D&D. And if I go over into my properties, what we've got is in the main tab, we have got, okay, well, what do you want to bind it to? So this is the data set, right? That's the data set. And I can select, I've got no collections, but I could also, bind it to a connector to my CDS environment, accounts, etc. Because it's a data set, it's expecting multiple items. And then we've got advanced. If you look down here into more options, what we've got is we've got all the properties that we were actually putting inside our manifest file. So you can see here we've got is it a master zone, the drop source, drop zone ID, all of these different things, and these are expecting expressions. So this is looking very similar to if I was dropping a gallery or something like that, and there's no surprise because it's intended to be used in the same kind of way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create going to create a drop zone here, and I'm going to call it zone 1. So I'm going to put in here zone 1, and I'm going to pop a button on here, which is going to say, right, let's go and create a collection of stuff. So if I go into here and put on select, all I'm doing here is just creating two collections, collection items 1 and collections 2, and I'm just putting some items in there. So that means that once I have selected this, now what I can do is I can bind this my control to call items 1. And then if I go over into the properties for that, in a very similar way to galleries, I can select which field inside that collection. And of course, if it was a binding to a database, I'd have all the attributes I can bind to. But in case this is just a in memory, I can just put add there. And so what this gives us is this ability to now see all these items that are in that collection. Of course, I could bind multiple items, and all this component will do is it will just put each field I bind to on a separate line. And then I can go over to the advanced properties, and I can say, okay, well, what's the item background color going to be? Let's make it red. And the all the things that I would expect to be able to customize, that I've given permission, I've given accessibility to in my manifest file. So that's good. That's the first step. But also what I want to do now is if I copy that and put it over and put another one, what I want to do here is I also want to say, let's make this drop zone 2, okay? Because that's going to be where I put my target drops. And if you remember in the manifest file, we had that special is master zone, because that's the thing that defines that this one on the left here is going to receive all the events. So what I'm going to say is actually the other drop zone ID over here is drop zone 2. So what I need to do is I need to specify that drop zone 2 is where I want to monitor events from as well as my own drop zone. I want drop zone 2. And then I can say, right, make this is master. I'm going to make this true, tell it that it is the master zone. The only last thing need to do is if we look at our collections here, we had 2 items, one for the left and one for the right. So obviously I need to change on the right here to say that this is now bound to not col items 2. So you can see it's only got a camera. So that's kind of set up the dragging and the dropping, which is quite, if I hold down Alt, I can test my app, and I can see here I've got this drag and drop functionality, which is cool. That's starting. But also what I need to do is respond to the events, because there's no good just having a drag and drop because it's not going to do anything, right? So what I need to do is go into my master drop zone and say, right, okay, select the on change event here. And I'm going to put a little bit of code into my on change event. And really all it's saying is that, okay, if the drop source is zone 1, remove the item from the left-hand side collection and put it into the right-hand side collection. And if drop zone, it's not drop zone 1, it will be drop zone 2. So do the opposite, move it from the right to the left. Okay, so you can see here that this is where the power comes, is because my component is just doing the dragging and the dropping, right? That's where its specialism is. I'm not dictating how I want to use this drag and drop functionality. I'm leaving that up to the maker of this app, and that's why this session is called Power Up Canvas Apps, because what we're doing is we're not powering up for ourselves, we're powering up for the maker. Now, I could have created, for example, a component that you had multiple drop zones, right? So it'd be one component that you could then add multiple drop zones to. But if I did that, I wouldn't be able to do things like, I want to just insert a shape, for example. I want to say, right, I'm going to put, a rectangle. I'm going to move this to the back, send to the back of my app here, and have over here another one. I might change the color of that to let's make that green and send that to the back. And so you can see here that what we're doing is we are augmenting our functionality in that maker experience and leaving the component to just handle the drag and drop. Obviously, I've got a little bit of customizability in here because I can select the fields that I want to bind it to, and also I can select the color that I want to have my background. I'm starting to look quite Christmassy now, actually. If I made this one red, why don't I do that? Because I'm feeling a bit Christmassy, so it's starting to get that time of the year. So let's make that red. There we go. My mum always used to say red and green should never be seen unless there's something in between. Otherwise, it looks Christmassy. So let's make them put them back together. There we go. If you're colorblind, I apologize. That's probably looking awful, actually. So never mind. But what we've got now is our on-change event. So if we play this app with any luck, what it should mean is, there we go. We can now move items back and forwards. So you can see that our PCF component is really, really simple, and I'm now leaving all the functionality up to the maker. So if we go over back into the app here, so the manifest file, we've seen what that's used for. We see that that's the properties that it's bound to. So if we actually go into the meat of the code, what you start to see is what we've got here is we've got a class. Now this is all, if you use pack PCF init, this is all kind of boilerplate stuff for you. And you just need to start to add functionality to the init function, to the update view function, and the get outputs function, and then destroy. And what I'm doing here is I'm using a library that I'm importing called Dragula, which is a real nice pun. It's a component that just very, very simple handles drag functionality. And it's really good because it works on mobile. And I think my top ethos when writing PCF components for Canvas apps is start with mobile. When you're writing it, test it on mobile first, because really mobile is something that is it's intrinsic to the way that Canvas apps work. And you shouldn't be writing a component that you then give to a maker and you say, oh, well, actually, you know what? You can only use that on the Windows, because a maker is equally going to write something on a mobile as they are going to write on the Windows, right? So always think about it from a mobile perspective. So this library is great. It's very, very simple, and it just handles the mobile touch events really quite nicely. So on the init, you can see here what it's passing this special notify output change function. And if you remember, that's the way that we tell the host, the Canvas app, that something's changed. So all that happens is we kind of keep a reference to that. Okay, so we say, okay, remember, and create a pointer on this to say that in the future, I can call notify output changes. And what I'm doing is on drop here, I'm registering this on drop Dragula event here to say, when I get a drop, go and get all the information. You can see what I'm doing here is I'm setting the drop source, the drop ID, the drop before ID, all this information that I am publishing using my attributes. And then I'm saying, now tell the Canvas app that I've changed something. And that's what triggers that on change event. And then my Canvas app has got access to all of these properties. And the way it gets access to those properties, if you remember, it calls this get output function. And that's where I return. This is the data that I've updated, because the telling the notify on output change doesn't give the data. It only tells the host that it's changed the data. It's then the Canvas app's responsibility to go and say, okay, now what has actually changed? And then lastly, they've got this destroy, which means we tidy up, etc. And and there's a few kind of additional things we need to obviously worry about, and that is the update view. Where is it? The update view. And this update view is the responsibility of this is to actually do the HTML stuff. Okay, so what I'm doing in here is actually retrieving the data that I get. So if we go into this add item DOM elements, I'm passing the data that's bound to that data set. So if we go into this function here, this is where all that kind of HTML-y kind of stuff goes, so I'm creating divs, and that's where I'm picking up the color. So you can see here, it's picking up the item, the background color, the font size, the font color, all that stuff, and then just adding divs. Now, for a simple stuff like this, just using document create element is fine. For more complicated stuff, you might, and I do this a lot, start to use React, which is actually the way in which a lot of the Microsoft user interface is all built using something called Fluent UI, and that's built on React. So it's fine for simple stuff with using create div, but as soon as you get to more complex stuff, then you can start to look into Fluent UI. And so really, there isn't much more complexity. You can see that is it. We're using this Dragula. We're listening to the on drop event. We're calling notify output changes, and we're adding the items that we're going to listen for. And so yeah, it then creates this very kind of powerful component that I can use in any scenario. Like, for example, here, this is obviously just moving stuff around, but you can see how, actually it's using the same component, but it's much, much more complicated. Now, interesting, you can see here that I put this, this little message says drop statements that are false here. Now, I could have put that inside my PCF component. I could have said, if there are no items, give me a list, give me a string to display. All right, I could have that as an expression. But then, okay, well, what about the color of that expression? What about the font size? Suddenly, it starts to balloon out of all control. So the reason that I'm sort of expressing this really important ethos is that now I'm putting the power entirely in the maker's hand. Okay, so if I just put a simple item here and say no items, what I can do there is I can now bind that to the visible. If I put visible here, search, you can see visible is always true, but I can bind this to an expression to say if the count, so count rows call items is greater than 0, or is actually in this case equals 0. So you can see it's now gone invisible. So if I move that over there, you can see it becomes visible. And that's what I mean by putting the power in the maker's hands. Really, really important, because I could have put that inside my component and then suddenly it's locked out. If I want as a maker to get that change font size, or even maybe display an icon, because this could be anything. This could be an icon, a picture, or something like that. Suddenly I've got to go back to the developer and ask it. So always be thinking, if you're writing these components, how can I empower the maker and not box things inside my component? So hopefully that makes sense. So we've looked at this drag and drop. We've looked at the manifest file. We looked at the index and this very simple set of functions that the component calls. We've added it, and so just quickly some little tips to round that off. Because we are GA, remember that we are GA always, right? Remember that we're on this journey towards GA, and things are changing slightly, and there are some teething problems, as I showed with my panda GIF, which I love. So updating a control version at the moment, if you change the version of your PCF control, what's going to happen is that your Canvas app is going to say, oh, you've changed. I see there's a new version. Do you want to update to the latest version? If you do that, it's going to currently remove the on-change event. So it's a little bug. So always keep an eye on your on-change event. Make sure it hasn't disappeared. I'm sure that'll be fixed before GA. Also, because we're adding stuff to the DOM, right? You have to bear in mind that if you're going to be doing something with CSS, be careful, because you could actually change the CSS that's being used by the Canvas app itself. You can actually completely muck stuff up, especially if you're using something like Font Awesome, which applies a lot of global styles. So the best practice here is always to namespace your CSSs. So if your Canvas app is called if your PCF component is called Canvas D&D, always prefix all your classes with Canvas D&D so that you're not going to overlap with any other CSS classes. And then, as I've been sort of stressing, think like an app maker. Put as much functionality in the hands of the app maker rather than building it into your component. Make your component do what it needs to do and nothing more. And then also, where it does have visual styles, consider actually having properties to allow them to change the font, the background color, all of those kind of things. And there is a great source of a lot of PCF components, the PCF gallery. If you are an app maker and you see PCF gallery, just treat it with a little bit kid gloves at the moment, because do bear in mind that a lot of this stuff people have just written as a sort of a proof of concept. They're certainly not production ready yet, certainly because the PCF is not GA. But also a lot of these things, as the platform changes, they may be not being updated. So do bear in mind that you do have to have a little bit of care there in terms of using those in a production environment. There are some limitations of, if you're used to writing PCF components for model-driven apps, there are some limitations of writing those same components in a Canvas app, for example, you can't use the web API. And actually, as was picked up earlier, there is this sort of there is probably going to be this premium license functionality, and indeed, it's unlikely that PCF controls will be able to use in Oakdale or Dataverse for Teams as it is now. So, as we are on this journey, the licensing is going to start to probably get in there, but I think the future really is really bright, because we're not far off March 2021. And actually, we are seeing some things coming down the line, like custom events. The stability of the Canvas app PCF is increasing with every release. And so I'm really, really excited. And I think it opens up a lot of opportunities. For example, maybe ISVs are going to start to produce components that will power up a Power Apps environment, and you'd be able to use those alongside the Microsoft first party. So I think the future is really exciting. If you want to sort of vote up some ideas, I've got a list of ideas that I would really appreciate some love, so that Microsoft might pay attention to them. If you go to this bit.ly link, PCF vote, that would be good. Also, I've got a discount code because I have a course for specifically writing model-driven app PCF components, and of course, a lot of the functionality and a lot of the techniques that you learn in that course are equally applicable to Canvas apps. And if you do want to enroll on that course, there's a code that you can use there, which gives you a 20% discount. But also, I'm going to give away a free copy to anyone who's attended here. And if you want to submit an idea, there's a bit.ly link to a form there. Submit an idea for a cool PCF component that would power up your Canvas apps, and I will pick a random winner, and I will give you a free copy. And I'm going to do that 9 a.m. PST tomorrow. So get your thinking caps on. And that's what I love about this, is that there is so much possibility, right? And so there's a list of all of those links, and also some links to some Microsoft Learn, which is some free content, which is really, really good as well. Really highly recommend doing that. Vote up my ideas if you can. And yeah, thank you ever so much. I hope if you've been writing PCF components already, I hope you got something out of this. Or if you're an app maker, I hope you're really excited about the possibilities going forwards. So any questions? I'm open to. I've been trying to answer a few questions along, but anyone's got anything else?
Well, we got a couple of questions that Alan De Castro has replied for us. So thanks, Alan. I don't know if you want to add on to it, Scott, but people had questions around, as a beginner of Canvas apps, what programming languages we need. So Alan was hit the nail on the head on that one. TypeScript, CSS, HTML, then React. But is there anything else that you want to include to the list? Not as much as the language itself, but resources.
Well, I think TypeScript is definitely the way to go. I think in front end development, when you're writing HTML stuff, there is a whole ton of stuff out there, resources about writing cool HTML stuff that people use in apps, and React is a really, really good example of that. There's a huge community of that, and that's what's so cool about this, is that really it's using existing pro dev skills in the front end development to really sort of power up that app maker environment. But yeah, that list is spot on. Also, I meant to mention that you can get the code for that drag and drop there. I've got that bit.ly link. It's just in GitHub. If you want to grab it. There's also the code for my Lemmings Canvas app in my source code repository in Git as well. So if you want to take a look at that, which is always good fun to have a bit of a play.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks for making yourself available. Well, welcome to Canada. I've said it before when you first moved. Nick Thomas said the next Maple Power needs to be an in-person somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. So, hopefully when this COVID thing is over, we can all meet in person.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, meeting in person is yeah. I'm really looking forward to that kind of thing.
It feels like it's one of those things that you talk with your kids about. There was a time that we used to all get together. It's crazy. It's been so long.
Exactly. I think I was talking to someone and back in the days when we used to breathe the same air.
That's right. That's right. Well, sir, have a great day. We'll prep up for the next session, and I've shared your information again on the chat window here, so folks can connect with you and ask more questions if they so desire to do. All right.
Great.
Well,
Thank you.
take care, Scott. I'll
Cheers.
talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.